All right, so now at this point, Bignon brings in some props. He talks about his philosophy class that he teaches. So he makes the point, he quote, being determined does not entail that you are not aimed at truth. So that's the point that he's trying to make. He brings out a thermometer and the magic 8-ball. So he could kind of comparing truth tracking in humans to inanimate objects.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, first of all, I find it quite odd that Bignon revolts when others point out that on Calvinistic ed, humans are nothing more than wet robots. And he complains that this comparison is not relevantly analogous. But now Bignon goes much further and compares humanity to a mere thermometer. I mean, come on, man. If you're going to say that we can't compare humans to robots on your view, then you can't compare humans to thermometers.
Right. So yeah, earlier in their discussion, Bignon does educate us all about analogies. And he says that to be a good analogy, there must be relevant similarities with no relevant differences. And to be fair, at that point, he was talking about moral responsibility, not about being aimed at truth. Mm-hmm. That said, do you think a thermometer can still be a good way of showing that something can be determined and aimed at truth?
Well, look. Neither robots, magic 8-balls, or thermometers are self-conscious or think of and about things. Mm-hmm. They do not consider competing hypotheses. They do not engage in the process of rationality to infer the best explanation. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So even if they were conscious, but mm-hmm. have the freedom as to what they were going to think of and about, or how they were going to think of and about it, that's, even if you're conscious, big deal. If you don't have the freedom to think, then you don't really have an advantage. In fact, I would say it's ultimately a disadvantage if it leads to your eternal conscious torment in hell. But those kinds of things are not relevantly analogous to the kinds of specific knowledge that I'm talking about in the Freethinking argument. It's not even close. Now, in the old man version of the argument, I can see you raising this. I've tightened things up. So this is not going to work. So the pertinent question raised is this: is the designer of the thermometer, did that designer intend the thermometer to track truth correctly or not? And on ed, that is not always that's not always God's intent when it comes to humanity. At least human thermometer makers seem to have a desire for thermometers to always track truth adequately. But it's too bad for the God of ed does not have that same desire for humans. I mean, isn't Bignon a computer programmer?
Yes.
Okay, if that's the case, I mean, you've got a background in that field too, right, Fox?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and I've talked to several philosophers of computer science, and even to understand this thing better. Computers they don't think of and about things at all. I mean, so you think about computers and calculators and thermometers, and a thermometer is different than a calculator. However, if the creator of a thermometer programmed the thermometer to read 98.6 degrees every time the temperature was actually over 100 degrees, mm-hmm. the thermometer would have no way to evaluate or rationally affirm if it had been determined to think and believe correctly. Not that thermometers think or believe anything, but let's do a crazy thought experiment and say that it can. God supernaturally zapped the thermometer with consciousness, mm-hmm. right? It couldn't think, it couldn't evaluate this. All it could do is assume. Not that thermometers assume anything, but let's pretend they do. The thermometer could only assume, and that assumption would also be programmed and caused and determined by its maker. So even if it's a bad assumption, well, it's not up to the thermometer, it's up to the maker on what does the maker intend. So one huge relevant difference between a thermometer and a human, if Bignon's ed view is true, is that the creator of thermometers they intend and design thermometers to always track truth. If ed is true, the creator of humans does not always intend humans to track truth. In fact, as Bignon affirms, God causally determines even his fellow elect Calvinists to affirm false beliefs. So anyway, there are so many relevant differences here. And I discuss some of these issues in greater detail in a couple articles on my website. One, I believe, is entitled A Lesson About Free Will and Responsibility.
Mhm.
I also discussed this in a recent article just in the last couple of weeks, I think, called Computers Don't Know Jack. Bottom line, if a computer does not possess knowledge, a thermometer definitely does not possess knowledge. If computers don't know jack, thermometers don't know jack. So thus, as Bignon would say, this thermometer analogy is not relevantly analogous.
Once again, freethinkingministries.com. All right. So